If thought I did. Okay, maybe now it's gonna appear. Ah, there we go. Huh. Okay. I thought I hit go live. So maybe I've been talking for about 10 minutes. I don't know if anyone heard me for the last 10 minutes. Maybe not. But in case you didn't, hello. Welcome to another live stream. I am planning to have a guest in just a few minutes, and I sent him a link to the Zoom call. And let me see if he has shown up in Zoom. Nope, still don't see him in Zoom. Uh, all right, maybe I should text him in Facebook and see if he needs any help getting onto Zoom. Okay. All right, you got the link. Ask him if he's, well, maybe I should just wait a couple minutes. I guess if he hasn't shown up by 6 or 6:01, then I'll see if he needs help. So, all right, let me go back to, let me pop out the live chat here. Get everything where I can see it. Okay, that's better. Okay. Getting a little smoother every time. This is my sixth live stream. Yeah, my sixth live stream. And the first time I've had a scheduled guest. I've had some guests on before, but they weren't scheduled. They were just people who came on impromptu. I thought having a scheduled live stream might be a way to get more people and they can schedule it into their day. But I also need to find a good time. There's, some days sometimes might be better than others. This is some Monday evening. Um, my first live streams were every other day. This is the first time I've taken 2 days off between a live stream. Ah, looks like he's shown up in Zoom. Okay, I have admitted him. And I see a black screen. I don't know if he's going to do. Oh, there we are. Hello.
Oh, hello, Dr. Norton. Nice to meet
I
you.
cannot hear you.
Uh-oh,
I don't know
what's
if you're
going on?
muted. Okay, looks like maybe you
Testing, testing.
unmuted now.
Hello?
Okay, now I got you.
Oh, hello, Dr. Norton. Nice to meet you.
Um, hold on one second. I forgot I had the system muted, and the YouTube screen was unmuted, so I was getting an echo, but I think I got everything the way it needs to be now. Okay, great. Glad you can make it.
My pleasure. I can't see myself in my own monitor, but that's fine if you can see me. I don't mind.
Oh, well, if you want to take a minute to tinker with it and see if you can get yourself to appear, that's fine. No hurry.
Okay, sure. Let's see.
Looks like a few more people have shown up. I'll just talk to the chat for a minute while you're
Sure.
working on that. So this is Benjamin Stringer, and I'll let him introduce himself in a minute after he gets his settings where he wants them.
Well, it's fine. I don't like looking at myself anyway, so as long as
Okay.
as long as the visual looks good on your end, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, it looks good to me.
Okay. Well,
I see.
thank you for inviting me on. I'm really happy to talk with you today.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. I see we've got a few more people in the chat. Audrey Lee has shown up and says, I can see and hear everyone. Good. Thank you, Audrey. Appreciate that feedback. Okay, so this is the guest that I mentioned is going to be here, and I apologize if anyone was confused. In my last live stream, I said it was going to be Tuesday at 6 p.m., when in fact it was Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific time, that is. And I got confused because there was a time difference, and I was maybe if Benjamin, if you want to tell us where you are, or just introduce yourself generally, maybe now would be a good time for that. So
Sure.
go ahead.
I'm Benjamin Stringer, and I'm calling in from Japan. So there is a significant time difference. It's morning here, and my day's just getting started. So thank you, Dr. Norton, for doing the time conversion and dealing with all of the difficulties that's ensued in that. And I write a Substack publication. I'm really just a hobby writer. My hobby is challenging my own ideas. It's called Axioms First, and my most recent piece was really just a list of questions that I wanted to get people's thoughts about. They seem to be unrelated questions at the surface level, but after I wrote it, I realized I think there's a common thread that might come out as we discussed them. And I contacted Dr. Norton and sent him the questions, and I'm curious to hear what type of thoughts or clarifications you can bring.
Okay. Feel free to call me Dan, by the way.
Okay.
I will put a link to your Substack in the chat so people can follow along. Just one moment, and that should appear. Okay, copy. And where's my chat window? Okay, there we go. So now there's a link in the chat. And let me, I guess I'll pin that here at the top so it doesn't get lost. Okay, good. And then I'll just type, click the pinned link. Oh, good. Someone, Kuda Baba, says that the link works. Okay, so I'm just going to say, click the pin link to see Benjamin's list of questions. Okay. All right. So this is going to be pretty informal. I did spend a little bit of time just before the stream thinking about these 5 questions you asked. And you mentioned in DMs that you're particularly interested in one of them. But I gave a little thought to each of them.
Okay.
And maybe before giving my thoughts on them, how about you just tell us a bit about what motivated this, how you became interested in these particular questions, and then we could go through them in order one by one if you want, or if you just want to jump around or start with a particular one, we can do that too. It's up to you how you want to do it.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, my hobby is challenging my own ideas. I like to have conversations with people, and I think these questions came distilled out of a number of conversations that I had had, you know, in person with people and in online chat rooms and things like that. And I realized they all share something in common, which is that they're really difficult to discuss constructively, especially between people who don't agree, but sometimes even people who have similar conclusions may have radically different justifications for those beliefs. And I'll try to summarize. I wrote 5 questions. I'll try to summarize them really quickly in about 20 seconds. So question one is talking about symbols, symbols that we encounter in society. And I want to know to what extent the symbols have meaning that's assigned to them and to what extent there's sort of an intrinsic meaning to those symbols. Question two is about racial pride. Can it be a positive component of one's self-concept? Question three is which have primacy, ideas or institutions? Question four is a question about the concept of privilege. And I'm basically asking, what does the concept mean? And does it point to something that's in reality? And then question five, are we morally responsible for the things from which we benefit or only for our personal actions? So I can give, the full wording and, a bit of explication about those as we go through each one on the list. I don't know if you want to take them in order or if you want to just choose one or two to focus on.
Okay, how about we go through them in order, at least on a first pass, and then if you want to come back to a certain one, then we can do that. I don't know how much time we have here. I don't have a hard stop. Do you have a hard stop today?
I don't.
Okay. So maybe I'll just spend a few minutes on each one, and then feel free to jump in if you want to at any points. And this can be very informal as to how much time we spend on each one. They don't have to be equal, and we can cycle through them multiple times if you want to.
Sure.
Okay. Let me just take a quick look at the chat, see if there's anything I want to reply to there. Okay, Audrey has a comment there, so maybe we can get some involvement from the chat as well at some point. But first, I'm going to give some of my thoughts on this. I did think there was a theme, and I'm interested to see if you would think this theme is in there as well. Um, you said under the surface there might be a commonality, and I thought the issue of free will versus determinism might be something that unifies these questions, or at least many of them. There seems to be an issue coming up multiple times of how much is under our own control, and then how much is due to things that are not within our control. And well, let me just pause there since this is before we get into any of the particular questions. Do you see that as a common thread, or did you have something else in mind?
That's very much in the same vein of what I was thinking. I was thinking the questions, your answers to these questions are going to reveal something about how much you how much you value thinking it as a means of interacting with others and improving your understanding of the world. So if you think you're determined, I can see how if you think that your thoughts and your actions are determined, I can see how that would bring you to a different understanding in all of these matters. You know, um, it, I think these questions might reveal something about your understanding of the efficacy of your own mind.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that we had a similar, at least, view of the common thread. So let me go through these. Well, let me just read the first one.
If you'd
And you
like,
already went
since
through. Go ahead.
since you're answering, if you'd like, I'll read each one and then you can respond to them.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Go ahead.
Okay, so number one, concerning the role of symbolism in public life. Um, Examples are kneeling, saluting, other physical gestures. or flags, anthems, pledges, and monuments, slogans, hashtags, and acronyms, etc. To what extent do such symbols have assigned meaning that differs from person to person? And to what extent is the meaning inherent and immutable?
Okay. So, first, a general caveat. These are more or less impromptu answers. So, these are not like final considered judgments on these questions. So, I
Sure,
might want to revise them if I were to talk about this in another show. Um, but just giving kind of my first off the cuff thoughts, well, not exactly that. I did say I spent a little time before the stream thinking about this, but one of the thoughts that came to mind when I was reading this question was the distinction in objectivism between what's called the intrinsic, the subjective, and the objective. And actually, I want to ask you before I go into that some more, like just to get a basic idea of your familiarity with Ayn Rand or objectivism, because that's the theme of my channel.
sure.
Um, so, like, ha have you read some of Ayn Rand? If so, like when, how long have you been familiar, if at all?
Um, I've probably read everything that Ayn Rand's written.
Okay.
And I've read Objectivism, a philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff. I've read An Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. I'm not a scholar of it, but I've read the basic things and I've found a lot of value in it.
Okay. And just approximately when did you first read Rand?
In college,
Okay, so some years ago.
it's been a while.
Okay. Okay, so have you heard of or are you familiar with the intrinsic versus objective versus subjective trichotomy?
Yes, I am. It's not that fresh in my mind. I don't think I could give a good explication of that extemporaneously, but I have read that, and that was one of the things that impressed me, I recall.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I could give a good explanation extemporaneously either, but that at least came to mind as something that might be relevant to this question. So let me see if I can flesh that out some. So in it might help to think in terms of a particular example. So you mentioned a variety of things in the question: flags, anthems, pledges, and so forth. I thought of one in particular, which was the American flag.
Sure.
So I was thinking, does that have like what kind of meaning does that have? Is it is it inherent? That's a word you used in the question, which is I don't know if it's exactly a synonym of intrinsic,
Hmm.
but I think it's at least close to that.
Sure.
And I was thinking, well, I wouldn't say it has inherent meaning or intrinsic meaning. Like if a child was playing around with flags and just was drawing flags, like making up flags, and just
Hmm.
by sheer chance happened to draw something that looked like the American flag with 13 stripes and um, 50 stars. Um, but let's say the child is 8 years old
Hmm.
and hasn't studied history and doesn't, maybe it's even a child in a different country, like
Sure.
Australia or Japan. And so the child has, there's no connection in the child's mind between this pattern of 13 stripes and the stars and the country, the United States of America. Whereas if it were to have intrinsic or inherent meaning, then I guess the idea is you would think, well, the child automatically knows that this flag it is drawn represents the United States of America. But I
Hmm.
think that's clearly wrong. It has no concept or idea of the United States of America. So I would say it's not inherent, the meaning of the flag. It depends to some extent on the knowledge that whoever is perceiving the flag brings to what they're perceiving. So I would so then to go to the flip side of it, if the meaning doesn't entirely just rest within the object itself, uh, I guess the flip side, the subjective side would say the meaning entirely depends on whatever's in the mind or consciousness of the perceiver, independent of any facts external to that. That would be the subjective view. So if I see the shape of the American flag and these 13 stripes and 50 stars, and I just have this feeling that it represents the country of Botswana, well, I think that's also incorrect. It doesn't represent that just because I feel that it represents that. Now, if I guess if I'm the originator of a flag, I can make up a flag of whatever kind I want and say that it represents Botswana. But if I encounter a flag that's already been created by someone else, if I'm not the originator of it, then I can't in that position just say, well, whatever I feel it happens to represent, whether it's Botswana or the Baltimore Orioles baseball team, um, that doesn't make it so. Whereas if the subjective view were the case, then it would make it so. Wishing would make it so, or believing would make it so. So I, th I think that, and this is again just my first kind of pass thinking about this issue, is that symbols have an objective meaning. They're not entirely divorced from what a person thinks or is in their mind. And it's also not entirely divorced from the external world, a reality independent of people's consciousness. It's a combination of the external world and the internal world, and based on that, you can decide what is the correct meaning of something. And there's another. I have some more thoughts on that, but let me just pause there and see if there's anything you want to interject with at this point.
I think you're giving a great answer. I I wonder though if there might be such a thing as a symbol that can in a way compel your mind to adopt a certain interpretation almost automatically. I'm having a hard time thinking of a good example, but let's take in a certain context, you could attach symbolic significance to like the color red. Let's say when you look at red, it automatically brings like the color of blood into your mind or something like that. Do you think there could be an automatic connection that's so powerful before you even have time to consider it? You make an association almost automatically, and it's not socially derived. No one told you it symbolizes red, but you've seen blood before, and now you see this color. This isn't a great example, but it's the best that I can come up with. Do you think there could be something like that?
I do think there certainly are associations like the one you mentioned. So if you see like the communist flag, that just came into my mind, and it's you've got the hammer and sickle in yellow against a red background. And now when you mention blood, that makes me think, well, communist regimes are very
Mm.
bloody. They've killed lots of people, but did the communists themselves intend a connection there? I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt they would want to say like we have a bloody regime here. Um, so I guess there can be associations that one makes when one sees certain things, like the color red. And depending on your evaluation or your knowledge about something, like given my knowledge and evaluation of communism, I might in my own mind think, well, red is a good symbol, or it's a good color for them to use on their flag because it's a bloody regime. But I don't, mm, I hesitate to say that's part of the objective meaning of the flag. I think the objective meaning um, would be, I guess, this gets actually into another point I was going to mention before I paused. There could be like layers of meaning. Like there's a basic core meaning that something might have. Like the basic core of the American flag, what it represents is the country of America.
Mm.
But as you learn more about America, you might say, okay, not only does this flag represent America, the country, it also represents freedom. and individual rights and capitalism. Now, someone else, let's say a leftist, a socialist, or a communist, might see the American flag. And for that person, given his Marxist ideology, he might think, okay, well, the American flag, yes, it has this core meaning. It represents the country of America, but it also represents imperialism and oppression and capitalism. Now, these are associations like oppression, um, or conquest or colonialism, which I wouldn't associate with it. But if you have a certain ideology like Marxism, maybe you would associate that with the American flag. And then there can be debates over whether these secondary associations, we might call them, are valid. Like, is it better to think that the flag of America represents oppression or rather freedom? Um, but but it has a primary or core meaning, which is simply that it represents this
My
country,
stream is
United.
froze, so I can't hear you at this time.
Oh,
Oh, hello.
okay.
Sorry, it
Um,
froze a bit, so I missed maybe your last two sentences. I'm sorry.
okay. So just to sum up the basic idea, I was thinking there could be like a primary core meaning to a symbol and then a secondary meaning. The secondary meaning could be right or wrong. Like you could have a debate as to whether the American flag properly represents oppression or freedom. Um, and I guess there's going to be more dispute over those secondary associations than there is on the primary association, which is just it represents this country, the United States of America. So something like blood, maybe that would fall into the what I'm here calling a secondary association with a symbol rather than a primary association. Like if I see red on the communist flag, the primary or core meaning of that would just be it represents the country of Soviet Russia or communist
Yeah.
China. But then the secondary meaning, which I would associate with it, would be blood, death, destruction, or something like that. And then, that could be disputed, and then we could have a debate about that.
Okay. You mentioned an 8-year-old's drawing a flag, and you said something to the fact that the 8-year-old doesn't really have a good understanding of what it means. Do you think then that it's appropriate to
Oh, I think you froze. Yeah, I don't know if the problem is on my end or your end or both. You froze for about 20 seconds or 10 seconds.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I may have a bad connection. I'll just try to re-summarize that question I was asking. Do you think it's appropriate to teach children to either revere or revile certain symbols that they have not yet um, had the opportunity to evaluate and understand?
That does strike me on first thought as inappropriate. Like I think understanding should precede evaluation. And if you're asking, should you revere or revile something, that sounds like you're already at the evaluation stage. And I don't know what the right metaphor is, putting the cart before the horse. But if they haven't understood it yet, then I don't think it should be the subject of an evaluation yet. They don't know what it is, the meaning of it, then you just, I guess that would amount to brainwashing. Like you must have this positive evaluation to the North Korean flag or whatever it is when they have no idea what it means or stands for.
Sure. Well, I guess growing up, I'm from Texas. It's pretty conservative, and people have really strong attachments to things like the American flag or the Pledge of Allegiance. And I was in youth groups where, the Pledge of Allegiance was basically part of the ceremony. And a lot of people, this is another controversy. People want the Pledge of Allegiance to be performed in school. That's controversial. So I don't know how much of an understanding of the symbol you should have before you're um, introduced to these symbols in a ceremonial fashion or taught to have a specific view of them.
Yeah, you're reminding me of my experience in elementary school when they would have us recite the Pledge of Allegiance. in class, I guess in the morning each day. And for a long time, there was this strange word which I didn't really understand, which was for witchet. I was thinking, what is a for witchet? And so for anyone who maybe is from a different country or doesn't remember this line, there's a line in the Pledge of Allegiance. Um, I don't even know if I could do it now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. There's the for which it.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think for one nation under God for liberty and justice for all. I think I got that right, or at least close. But anyways, there was this string of sounds for Witchit, and I had no idea what that was. So I doubt that's a good idea to just have kids reciting stuff rotely, which they don't understand, maybe don't even identify the words, as I wasn't able to parse all the words when I first heard this. I don't even know if I had ever seen it written out. I just heard the sounds. I guess
Sure,
it's
sure,
easier to. Um, but I think it's, yeah, I guess it encourages a mindless kind of mentality uh, when there's no understanding. And it's just reciting something sounds which you don't understand. It doesn't seem right to me, I think. Um, but I know it's especially like well, I don't know, especially, but like one nation under God, like are we en encouraging children to believe there is a God without having any discussion about it? That doesn't seem right. I mean, this also raises issues of like religion in schools, and I guess one solution is to privatize things, and you can, if you're a religious parent, you can send your kid to a religious school, or and you could do the same thing with regard to the Pledge of Allegiance. If you want to send your kid to a school that has them recite the Pledge of Allegiance, you can, but there should be a free market that allows other schools to exist where you don't have to do that. But that's getting into other territory. But in general, I would say, like if I'm running the school and I'm part of the free market, I wouldn't I don't think I would create a school that has kids reciting things they don't understand, whether it's the Pledge of Allegiance or some Catholic liturgy. I guess if you go to Catholic school, you've got to learn some. I didn't go to Catholic school, but I would imagine they have to recite some things that they don't understand. But I think if you want to teach a child and have the child's mind develop, it's not good to have the child just mindlessly reciting things they don't understand.
sure. But it seems that that lack of understanding can persist into adulthood. Um, I'm wondering what explains the strong emotional attachments and repulsions that symbols bring out in some people, because there are some people I've spoken with who really consider it just crucially important in the development of children into citizens that they be taught to revere these symbols and to partake of the ceremonies. Um, I, I can't really represent their view well because I'm trying to understand it myself. But why do you think people have these strong reactions to symbols in such a way? I've never experienced that myself. Um, if somebody explains to me that well this symbol has a different connotation to me because I'm I'm aware of negative aspects, but I'm trying, I adopt this symbol because it has an alternative positive meaning. um, that's an acceptable answer to me, but for some people that's not good enough. One example might be the swastika. So I live in Japan, and a small culture shock that a lot of Americans and Europeans receive when they come to Japan is that there are swastikas everywhere because it's also a religious symbol. It's a symbol, you can find it on the guide maps. It might even be on Google Maps if you look the locations of all of the Buddhist temples. they're demarcated on the map with a little swastika symbol.
Hmm.
I think it's a counterclockwise instead of a clockwise swastika. There's some difference, but it's completely unrelated to anything that has to do with Nazism or white supremacy because it's a thousand-year-old symbol that they've been using forever, and the Nazis appropriated it. But there's have nevertheless arisen certain controversies about this symbol. There's an anime series. There's also a manga called Tokyo Revengers, and they use the swastika symbol in their graphics. And there was a bit of a controversy because this stuff was getting exported into the Western world where the symbol has a completely different meaning. For myself, I'm satisfied with the explanation. Well, that it doesn't mean the same thing to me. We have this symbol in a different tradition that's older than Nazism and it has no relationship. And I say that I'm fine with that. That's good enough. But some people insist that it nevertheless be removed.
Hmm.
Uh, do you have any sense of what the best way to parse an issue like that might be?
I think it's uh I guess my immediate reaction is similar to yours. Like I understand that there's a different tradition behind that symbol in Japanese culture. And I haven't looked into this, but just based on your description of it, it seems very plausible that, there's just a different history behind it. And if you go to a country like that, it shouldn't be something that causes you um, I mean, I guess you could be upset by it, but you should also recognize that that these other people have a different meaning they attach to it, and they're not trying to offend you. And I don't think it's right to get angry at someone who in the Japanese culture who uses this symbol. Now, if I guess if some Japanese person understands the associations that symbol has in a Western context, and then jumps onto social media and says, "I love the swastika" or something, um, then I think it could be appropriate to get angry at that person, especially since they did it with knowledge of its meaning to a Western audience. But I think this is an example of the point that symbols don't have inherent or intrinsic meaning. It's contextual.
Sure,
Um, and yeah, I think just not being mindless about it, I get to connect it up to the Pledge of Allegiance point, being mindful about this and using your mind to understand and recognize, okay, yes, it's the same symbol, but it has this different history, different meaning to different people. So that's going to color my evaluation of people and how they use it.
sure, sure.
Um, I don't know if that answered the question you were asking me, but those are my initial thoughts on it. Let me just jump back over to chat here to see if there's anything there I want to
Sure.
engage with. Oh, I see we got some more comments. Just take a quick look through. Huda Baba is writing some things. Social metaphysics versus independent thoughts. Don't forget that words are symbols of concepts. Yeah, just words themselves are symbols.
Absolutely.
Um, and let's see. So it looks like it's all Kuda Baba and Audrey Lee saying some things in the chat. Kuda Baba says, OPAR, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, a lot of self-described objectivists. That's what OIST is. Haven't even read that. Audrey says, there's meaning and there's connotation. Yeah, they're
Mhm.
different things. Or you could also say denotation and connotation, where maybe denotation is like the primary meaning or the core meaning I
Right.
was referring to, and then the connotation is like the secondary meaning, the associations you might have. Um, and then blood red is the appropriate color for collectivists, says Kudababa. Audrey Lee says meaning is the reference, connotation, the associations. Okay, yeah, that's similar to what I was just saying a second ago. And um, okay, he's frozen. Now he's back. Audrey says she's got to go. Kudababa says for which it, LOL.
You
And
should
not
make a
necessarily.
flag that says "For Witchit." We'll pledge allegiance to the nation of For Witchit.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like kind of an Ewok, like from Star Wars. Wasn't there a Ewok that had a name like Wicket or something? That's what jumps into my mind. Um, okay, and then the last comment from Kudababa, not necessarily mindless. You have to teach kids that they will learn how to learn and then to think for themselves. Okay, so that's the latest
I'm
chat.
interested in the comment that talks about language and words itself just being a system of symbols. Because if you were to assume that's completely subjective, we wouldn't be able to communicate with each other at all.
Right.
There's a this is a very obscure example. I don't know if you know, I think Mason Williams, the guy who did Classical Gas, the guitar song.
I
Uh,
do not know him.
yeah, it's on his record there was on a B-side track there was sort of a humorous song and it was called The Prince's Panties. And it's about a prince who he uses the same words that we use in language, but he assigns a different meaning to everything. So his word for dog is panty because they pant.
Mm.
And he uses alternative meanings for every word, and it's a humorous song, and he gets in all sorts of trouble because he can't communicate with other people. So he just assigns a new meaning for everything, and at the end of the song, his dogs all eat him. But I don't recommend the song. It seemed relevant right now.
Yeah, that's another case where you can apply this trichotomy
Sure.
and I'm trying to think of a word that's has the same letters and sound, or at least roughly the same sound in different languages. Um, but nothing is jumping to mind. I guess you know some Japanese, being someone who lives in Japan, but are there any words you can think of that are the exact same sound as English and Japanese? Or it doesn't have to be Japanese, it could be anything, but have
Um,
totally
so,
different meanings.
so yeah, there's a lot of this. In Japanese, they borrow a lot of words from English, but often the borrowed word has a different meaning from the English word. So let me think of some there, and there's some humorous examples of this, like what's a good one? Shoe cream. Do you know what shoe cream is?
Like you would use to polish shoes.
It's a cream puff.
Oh, they're like something you eat.
Right, yeah. They call it a shoe
And
cream.
huh,
And
okay.
there are other examples like this. It's borrowed words from English where they've assigned a new meaning to it. And yeah, so that does happen.
I just thought in English there's also cases of this. So I guess you don't even have to go outside of one language. So like the word bark
Hmm,
can mean the stuff around a tree,
right,
or it can mean the sound, the thing that a dog does, right? So there's no intrinsic um, meaning to this sound. It just depends on the how it came to be used historically. It's going to have different meanings.
sure.
Okay. I'm just taking a look at the clock here. I see it's 6:40 now,
Ooh,
and I'm not sure what kind of pace we should be going at. I mean, I guess I can leave it up to you. Um, so I think I want to make this stream maybe not longer than maybe go like 60 to 90 minutes, somewhere in that
okay,
range.
sure.
So, and if we don't go through everything that you're interested in talking about this stream, maybe we could have another one sometime. But given that we have, let's say, roughly 75 minutes for this
Okay,
stream, so we'll go
yeah.
till like 6:15, or I guess that's 11:15 your time. Do you want to stay on this more, or do you want to go to a different question?
I'm satisfied. I think you've given some great answers and you've given me some things to think about. So thank you. Yes, let's move on to number two. Number
Okay.
two, do you think racial pride is or can be a positive component of one's self-concept? If so, under what conditions is it appropriate and when does it become objectionable?
All right. So for anyone who's just joining, these are a list of questions which you can find a link to in the chat. I've pinned it at the top. So this is now question two. First thing that came to my mind when I read this was the case of liking a sports team who that's from your hometown. Like, could you have pride rightfully in the Denver Broncos, let's say, if you're from the Denver area? And I think that's reasonable. Now, I don't think it can go very deep to like your who you are as a person. But I think it's okay to have at least some kind of surface level identification with some hometown team and root for that team. Now, actually, when I grew up in the East Coast in Virginia, and I was a Los Angeles Lakers fan rather than a Washington Bullets fan. They were called the Bullets at that time, the basketball team. Now they changed their name to the Washington Wizards.
Hmm,
So for the younger generation, you might not recognize the Washington Bullets. But even though that was the closest NBA team to me, I preferred to root for the Lakers. So I went against my hometown team. But I guess most people root for the home team. And I think that's a fine thing to do, even though, but it just can't be like a core part of your identity. This is something very accidental. Um,
sure.
Now, so I was thinking like, okay, does that carry over to race? Like, you don't really choose, just as you don't choose the hometown you grow up in, you don't choose your race. And it seems like it's okay to root for the home teams, even though that's just an accidental characteristic of the fact of where you were born. Likewise, does it make sense to like your people of your race? Like if you're white or you're black, does it make sense to like white or black people? Um, Analogously to the way it makes sense to root for a home team. Uh, if it does, not I'm not going to say it does make sense, but if it does, it has to only make sense in a superficial kind of way.
Hmm,
Like that can't be the core part of your identity.
sure,
Um, and I was thinking like someone like Isaac Newton, can I? He was a European white person or Englishman, I guess. Like, can I find pride in the fact that I have the same race, at least at some level of abstraction? Between me and Isaac Newton. Like you could parse it more finely, and there's a question of what even is race. Like, do you want to say
sure,
Irish are their own race, or and the Scots are their own race, and the English, or are they all part of one race? There's been Irish racism against Irishmen, and historically, I know when they came to the U.S. There were other European settlers who said like we won't hire Irishmen because and analogously to the way a couple centuries after that, people would say, I won't hire blacks or I won't have anything to
sure.
deal with them. So, exactly what is race? That's another issue. But just at one level of abstraction, you might think, okay, well, I've got something in common. I'm the same race, if we're going to allow that term, as Isaac Newton. Can I take pride in the fact that he had made these amazing scientific achievements? Not really. I mean, I think an irrational white person has less in common with Isaac Newton than a rational black person, right? Even though,
Sure.
like a black person who is scientific and uses his mind and he doesn't is going to have more in common if we're thinking of important deep similarities than a white person who is anti-science and irrational and um, so I don't know if it makes sense to have any kind of racial pride, but if it does, it's got to be very superficial um, kind of thing. It certainly doesn't go to the core of your identity. So that's my first thought. And I don't know that I had more to say on that one, but let me just pause there and throw it back to you and see if you want to chime in.
Sure. Our problem is that I think we just agree too much. So maybe it would be helpful if I sort of give voice to um, a perspective that you can argue against. So I've encountered the view that racial pride can be valuable um, when it emerges from the context of having overcome oppression, and that racial pride can help. It can help one become more resilient in the face of oppression, and has some benefit along those lines. So groups that have been discriminated against or have suffered unjustly historically can benefit from cultivating a sense of pride in their group because of the things that they have successfully overcome. Do you think that resistance to oppression could be something that legitimizes a level of useful racial pride?
I'm not sure, but the first step in in thinking about this, not to say this is the right one necessarily, but the first place my mind goes is just to get a concrete example on the table. I think that's generally a good thinking practice is to try to think in terms of concretes, um, as a as opposed to just getting lost in a world of abstractions. I'm trying
Sure.
to tie it down to concrete reality, and that can be helpful many times, I think. So I was thinking, okay, well, what about the blacks who were enslaved and they overcame that um, through took, I guess, many decades or centuries even. They were first enslaved, I don't know when, maybe around 1600s, early on in um, in the colonies, and then it wasn't until over 200 years later that they were freed. So if you yourself are a descendant of one of those people, does it make sense to take pride in the fact that your ancestors overcame that injustice? Um, Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you can. I guess one distinction to make here is between what individuals, it's like, so you as an individual haven't overcome this slavery if you're living now in the 21st century. Um, and so you can't take credit for overcoming the slavery. You could, whereas like if you're Frederick Douglass, someone like that, then you can. So if there is any pride, I think it's going to be much less, much more muted, which is now reminding me of what I was saying before. Like if there is any sense to having pride in your hometown team, um, it's got to be a very superficial kind of thing. So likewise, if you are a descendant of a slave, maybe there can be some kind of pride there, but if so, it's got to be much more muted and less, not nearly as great in degree as the original pride. Beyond that, I'm not really confident or certain what to say about that. But
Is there any virtue that's accessible to someone as a member of a racial group that is not also available to them as an individual?
accessible to them as a member of a racial group, no.
Right. Because I'm a member of this group that has overcome oppression and been confronted with these challenges and persisted, because of that position, I have access to certain virtues that would not be available to me outside of this group.
Oh, so like like if you were confronted with slavery and you overcame that, would that give you access to some kind of pride which you could not have access to if you were not confronted with slavery and didn't have to live through that. Is that the question?
That's close to the question. I tied it more to the racial group, but you tied it to actually overcoming slavery. It's close enough. It's close enough. Let's go with that interpretation of it.
Okay. Uh, well, I maybe you could have access to it, but you would have to get it through a different means. Like, let's say you're a you're you're a black woman and or no, let's say you're a black man and you overcome the the oppression of slavery. Let's say somehow like you're Douglass and you overcome slavery, you're freed, and you can have a lot of pride from having done that. And let's say now that you're free, you have the right to vote. I'm not saying this matches up exactly with historically how it went, but let's say that if you're a free person, you're not a slave, then you have the right to vote in a country. But let's say now you're a black. Frederick Will Douglass is not a black woman, so he might have the right to vote, but a black woman does not. So there's this other kind of um, inequality, which he doesn't have to face. So he can't know what it's like to both face the oppression of slavery and the oppression of not being able to vote, assuming that is some kind of oppression. I've heard at least one objectivist, a very well-known one, say voting is not that big of a deal. And I guess I can see a case to be made for that, depending on what it is that you're voting on. But let me not go down that route now. Let's just assume that if you don't have the ability to vote, that's a case of oppression. So um, Frederick Douglass can't he can have the pride that comes from overcoming the slavery, but he cannot have the pride of overcoming the inability to vote. Whereas a black woman could have that kind of pride if she does something that enables her to like she advocates for the right to vote for women. Now she has access to a kind of pride which Frederick Douglass cannot. Maybe she can have access to both kinds of pride, both the pride of overcoming the inability to vote and the pride of overcoming enslavement. So this is kind of a meandering answer, but I, I think there are certain kinds of pride which I guess, given your circumstances, you just can't have access to at some level of abstraction. Like at the level of just overcoming injustice, sure, you can have that. You can get that in many different ways. Overcoming slavery, overcoming the inability to vote, overcoming like some antitrust laws if you're a businessman. Let's say you're a white man and you run a business and you're subject to the injustice of antitrust laws, which punish you even though you've done nothing wrong. I, for anyone who doesn't know the objectivist view on antitrust laws, they're very bad and they're unjust. I'm not going to try to make that case now, but just take some. If you don't like that example, take some law that subjects people to injustice. So there's always, if you go to a high enough level of abstraction, you can experience the pride. But when you particularize it and you're talking about specific forms of it, like overcoming the inability to vote, that depending on your history, you might not be able to have access to the pride that comes from overcoming it.
Sure. Could I propose a different example?
Sure.
Um, Japanese in America were confined to internment camps and suffered pretty terrible oppression during World War II, whereas the Japanese living in Japan didn't really suffer the oppression of an outside group in the same way in their history. So would that mean that Japanese in America have some kind of legitimate claim to racial pride while the Japanese in Japan do not?
Well, I think they would have the ones in America would have a claim to some kind of pride. Um, but should it be considered racial pride, um, as opposed to just pride? And
Mm.
that's what I'm not sure about.
Well, they
Uh,
were in turn very much on the basis of their race, you know.
yeah. Um, but like, is the proper is there right to feel racial pride? I guess maybe this comes back to the superficial versus deep kind of pride. Like maybe they can have a superficial kind of racial pride, but fundamentally, what's important is the choices that individual Japanese people made. And like there might have been maybe there were variations among Japanese Americans, and some of them fought very hard to overcome the oppression. I don't know exactly what happened in the history there. Like, did they fight for it, or were they just freed by the whites at a certain point? I don't know. But just to, for the sake of this example, let's say that some of them fought hard against it, and as a result of their efforts, um, they overcame it. Whereas maybe other Japanese Americans fought much less hard or not at all, or maybe they weren't even opposed to it and they just kind of rolled over and said, well, it's it's um, it's good to be self-sacrificial. Maybe they were influenced by Christian ethics or something, and so they didn't. Now, so you're going to have people who are both Japanese, but they can't take the same kind of pride given their individual choices. So, if there is any sense to the idea of racial pride, I think it has to be very superficial. The most important thing is the choices that individuals are making. That's really the most important thing that feeds into a sense of pride, I think.
Yeah, as I said before, I think our perspectives to this are on this question are pretty close. Because I think virtue is something that has to be exercised at the individual level. And if, pride is the recognition of your own virtues or the aspiration to certain virtues, that seems to be something that can only happen at the individual level. So,
Yeah, and morality generally is an individual issue. Um, which I guess runs counter to how it's conventionally thought. Like a lot of people will think it's a very social thing. Like what morality is about essentially is your relations to other people, how you interact with others. Whereas on the objectivist view, it's much more individualist. Like if you're alone on a desert island, you could be moral or immoral, depending on the kind of actions you take. Like if you choose to survive on this desert island when you're alone, uh, you can either do use your mind and try to figure out, well, how do I build a shelter? How do I catch some food? Or not do those things. And the moral thing to do, if you've chosen life, is to do whatever is necessary, cook the food, find the shelter you need. So it's not essentially social on the objectivist view. That is morality, and it's essentially about what is the individual doing to further his own life. That's what
well,
morality essentially is for objectivism.
we can all have the pride of overcoming the oppression of nature, I guess.
Mm, oppression of nature. I start to worry a little when I hear that phrase because um, I think it's very important to distinguish um, something like coercion or
I
oppression
I was
from just
speaking,
causation.
sure, I was speaking poetically or trying
Oh,
to
yeah. Okay.
anyway.
Yeah, I guess I've had many debates with leftists, and some of them, not all of them, but some of them will say even nature is coercive. Um, so they try to make things sound coercive that are not. Like they'll talk about economic coercion, whereas on the objectivist view, the term coercion means using physical force, a human using physical force against another human to constrain their will, their choices, like
Sure.
using
Well,
a gun to threaten someone. to do something. If you don't do whatever, if you don't give me your wallet, I'll shoot you or something. Whereas on the view of many leftists, they'll say, well, coercion is inescapable. Even if you're alone on a desert island, you're forced to do certain things if you want to survive. So aren't we all just forced? And I think that obscures the proper use of the term coercion in the context of political philosophy. But that's kind of a aside.
Absolutely. I claim a bit of poetic license. So,
Sure. All right. Let me
uh,
take a quick look at the chat to see if any other comments have come in. Where's my chat window? Here we go. Oh yeah, we got some more. Um, Kudababa is back with some more, and John Wayne has dropped in. Let's see what. Oh, Kudababa says, "Good song. Haven't heard that B-side. Sounds funny. Strictly racial pride is not valid. I don't think the analogy with a sports team works." It says Kudababa. It does not make sense to relate to your ancestors' experiences based on race, says Kudababa. He continues, a racial connection is meaningless, a non-concept, a fabrication. Most talk of racism is, in fact, a discussion of shared values and ideas, which have nothing to do with race. It's more about culture. Um, John Wayne. I'm not sure what you're referring to there, John. Maybe you came in the middle of something. But no, I don't think um, what you're asking there is. I think the answer is no. I don't think there's evidence of that. But maybe you came in midstream and you're something confused you there. Um, and then, or maybe you're referring to. No, I don't think that would make sense. And then Kudababa says, just be babbling, LOL. Okay, that catches us up on the chat. So, all right. So I see it's 7:03 now. So let's go for another 10 or so minutes. And
okay. Shall we move on to the next question?
yeah, if you want to, we can do that. Go for it.
Okay, question three. Which have primacy, ideas or institutions? That is, do we hold our ideas and values because we are shaped by social institutions, or are these systems and structures within society a product of prior ideas? Which is more fundamental?
I first thought when I read this question, there's a reciprocal connection, but that ideas are more fundamental. When I thought about it a little more, I think I lean more towards like ideas that are even more fundamental than I was thinking at first. Um, Institutions don't create themselves. They're based on ideas that people have. People have the idea that it's good to make certain institutions, like whether it's school or church or certain laws, somehow people get it in their heads that they have these ideas in their minds that we should create these things. So it seems like the idea has to precede the institution. Now, I guess once you have the institution, it could reinforce certain ideas. Like if you've got a school, let's say, it might teach children certain ideas, um, so that the children don't independently have to come up with the ideas. They don't have to originate them. Someone else came up with some idea, say the theory of evolution, and decided that was a correct view in biology. And then they came up with the idea that it would be good to teach this. So they create a school, and then that school teaches the idea of evolution. So now I guess the idea is quicker to come by. It's kind of wholesaled, mass produced. Um, uh, but so I think my example, like it might be I might have mixed cases here. So at first I was saying the school is an example of an institution, but then I think I shifted implicitly to making the theory of evolution be an institution of sorts without being clear that I did that. So I think this example is a bit unclear. But anyways, um, I'll just say for now that it seems like ideas, at least temporally in time, they have to precede the institutions, but then once you have the institutions, they can help make it more likely that certain ideas persist in a culture. But it seems to me like my first pass on this is to think that the ideas are more fundamental. I'll pause there.
Okay, that's also where I am, but I wrote this question in response to some conversations I had had with people who seem to hold the exact opposite view, and it's hard for me to imagine the opposite of the situation that you've just described. It's hard for me to imagine institutions being more fundamental or being prior to ideas. Um, the only thing that I can think of would be if we evolved from prior organisms that did not have a capacity for reason, but yet still had some type of social structures that preceded our capacity for reason, and that maybe some of these structures persisted so long, or patterns within them persisted. Um, if you want to call that an institution, I don't know, do bonobos and chimpanzees have institutions? They have um, group structures and they have hierarchies, and apparently even different groups of chimpanzees have you know, clashes with one another in certain ways of organizing their societies, even though they're not conceptual creatures. Could it be that we emerged from institution having animals that did not have ideas that they predicated their institutions upon? I'm sorry, that was a bit clumsily worded. Um, or it really comes down to how we define an institution, I think. If an institution is that which is produced by the application of ideas to social structures, then of course the ideas must precede it. But I wonder if there's something like a proto-institution, something that we could have had in early days.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm one example that came to mind as you were talking is beavers building dams.
Hmm.
Like, is that an institution or spiders spinning webs?
Yeah,
Um, I'm curious actually what a definition, like if I just Google a definition of institution, what it would tell me. I'm going to do that just a moment.
sure.
Institution definition. All right, so what I get from Google, it says number one is a society or organization founded for a religious, educational, social, or similar purpose. And then the second definition it gives is an established law, practice, or custom. So maybe some of that would apply to non-human animals, like an established custom. Um, like custom might sound a little too mentally involved to say
Hmm.
that an animal is doing it. Like, is it a better term to use like habits or instincts?
Hmm.
Certainly law um, would sound too anthropomorphic to my ears to apply to an animal. But like an established practice, I mean, that's practice, that's a pretty broad term. Maybe that could apply. Um, Society or organization. Um, Society sounds a little too anthropomorphic for me to say that applies to animals, but maybe organization. I mean, of course, it's all implicit. They're not like they don't explicitly have the idea of an organization. Um, so yeah, maybe proto institution would be a term that one could use to describe what animals engage in. Like you mentioned, like there's a hierarchy among certain primates. Like there's the alpha male, I guess, in a group of chimps or wolves. Um, and given that there are these hierarchies or structures um, that, let's say, preceded human beings, and then humans evolved out of uh, organisms that had those, could it be said that institutions or proto-institutions precede ideas? Well, then there's also like proto-ideas, right? Could we say that these animals have proto-ideas that led to their proto-institutions? Um,
That would just be sort of perceptual level thinking, I guess.
yeah, so like perceptual associations,
Right, right, yeah.
um, which animals have. Like there's Pavlov's laws. You can use stimulus and response conditioning, and these are, so the dog learns to associate the sound of a bell with the presence of food, and it starts to salivate. So, yeah, that's a kind of perceptual association, um, and maybe
Okay.
it could be called a proto-idea. But you were going to say something?
Sure. So the problem once again is I think I really agree with your answer. Maybe it would be helpful for me to completely turn the model around and describe to you the opposite of your conclusion and see if you can work against that.
Sure.
So suppose I said to you that institutions are more fundamental than ideas, that the most fundamental thing are these social structures that human beings create and pass on and maintain in the same way that chimpanzees or bonobos just so, and that our very ideas, our language, our conceptualization, these are just tools that the institutions use to maintain and propagate their own power and prominence. So it would be something like a gang sign. There's certain, this brings us back to the first question of symbolism. It would be something like the symbols or the language that a gang uses, it signals their belonging to their group. But the primary thing that's happening is that it's a group structure that's asserting itself. And it's really just all of your language and your argumentation and your ideas that you point to just serve the ends of propagating this group. I think I've heard some similar claims to that line. To me, to me, that is an unspeakably perverse way of looking at the world, but I want to see how you can chew through a proposal like that.
It reminds me of the Marxist view that material conditions create the ideas people hold. Like, I'm not too familiar with Marx, but I guess the idea is if you're born into a certain class, like a wealthy class, then that's because of that, you're more likely to uphold something like property rights. And it's really just a rationalization that you want to find some way to keep your property. And if you had been born into a lower class, then you wouldn't be as enthusiastic about property rights, and you would be more in favor of a redistribution of wealth so that you could benefit some that way. But I guess that is belied by the fact that you could have someone who's not wealthy, who's pro property rights, and you just as an individual, you might have had the experience of not being very wealthy. I've certainly had that experience, certainly relative to like billionaires and millionaires. Yet I uphold their property rights. So you might say, like, even if I'm in a lower class, I can still have ideas which, contrary to the Marxist theory, you would think are like, if it's true that my material conditions create my ideas, then as a lower class person, I should believe in redistribution of wealth or communism, but I don't. So, just by introspecting on your own experience, I think that gives some evidence, at least, that that sort of uh, causation doesn't apply. Now, maybe something similar could be said for the kinds of examples you were giving. Like you could your uh, what was the example with the gang symbol? Could you describe that again?
Sure. So, if you have the Crips and the Bloods, they all have, their rival gangs in Los Angeles, I think. They have various symbology that they adopt. They have, hand gestures and they have symbols that they spray paint on buildings. They have certain phrases and terminology that signals they belong to the in group. They've got basically certain ways of conceptualizing their place in society and their relationship to other groups. Um, that's one example. Political movements have the same types of things. And I think the view that I'm putting up here for you to argue against is that type of model explains all human thought. All human thought ultimately is a flex or type of gang symbol. It's some type of human structure or system created language that it uses to propagate its own power, that there's no, ultimate truth or ultimate connection to reality. It's just all social signaling, and that the most fundamental thing is the social power structure. That's what gives birth to all of our ideas and our language and our concepts.
Okay. It still feels a bit hazy to me, um, like how to engage with this. Um, I'll just throw out some thoughts, and then we got to wrap up soon, but
Sure, 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 sure.
I'll just put out one or two more thoughts, and then we'll wrap up. So, I guess one thing that might be relevant here is thinking like if you grow up in a gang-infested neighborhood, you can, depending on your own choices, your own free will, you can become a member of one of these gangs, or you could entirely avoid gang culture and you could go live in another place. And the fact that you can either kind of absorb the gang culture mindlessly or think for yourself and not choose not to become part of the gang shows that you're not being determined by the gangs you're surrounded with. Like you're not determined to become a gang member or buy into whatever ideas they have about how the world works and how like if they teach if it's part of the gang's ideology that they're a victim of society, you can go out and prove you're not. You can make something of yourself. Um, just your own individual experience and free will, I think, is I guess some of the evidence you could use to show that the social environments that you're born into or grow up in is not the fundamental causal driver of your life because you can escape that. And there's many examples of that. Um, so um, Ayaan Hirsi Ali is also coming to mind of someone who she's grown. I guess she grew up in a Muslim background, but she escaped that and she became westernized, at least to some extent. And I guess she was atheist for a while, although now more recently, I think she's become Christian. But in any case, I think that sort of example, if you have someone going against what their environment encourages or believes, shows that it's the individual that's the causal fundamental, not the society into which he was born. So, so there's some initial thoughts.
Yeah. It seems to me that people who espouse the viewpoint that these social structures are more fundamental and that the concepts in the language are secondary, that seems like a bit of a self-confession to me. Maybe it's true for them, maybe that's what they're doing with language. But
Yeah,
they
I think
they
it's.
they don't need to attribute that to the rest of us.
Yeah, if you don't think for yourself, I guess you absorb um, what's around you. But that doesn't mean you had to do that. You know, it was a choice. So um, I guess what you're saying is people are um, they're imagining that just because they made a certain choice, that that's how it has to be for everyone, and they build a theory or philosophy around the kind of choice that they happen to make without giving due consideration to the fact that you can make other choices.
Yeah. And one of the most disturbing, I guess, consequences of that way of thinking is it seems to me that real communication with people who think that way on the level of ideas is seems definitionally impossible because they're telling you what I'm doing is playing a language game that has the objective of serving and maintaining a certain power structure that I favor as opposed to your alternative power structure. And so we can't both look at reality and arrive at the same concept and mean the same thing and talk to each other. And that's just disturbing to me.
Yeah, maybe there's some kind of self-refutation going on. Like if you say language is just a game, okay, well then can I
Yeah,
just immediately dismiss you and not take you seriously if that's your view of,
it seems to be the only choice you have.
okay, so let me uh, not be playing games with language myself. And since I said that we were going to wrap up around this time, let me take that language seriously as actually applying to reality. And I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat and see if anything else came in. No, it looks like there aren't any new comments there. Um, okay, so let's uh, draw a line here, and we can talk through DM later on if you want to come back on sometime, and we could talk about the other questions on another live stream. We could definitely do that. But thank you for coming on, Benjamin. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these with you and giving me more content for channel.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for inviting me and thank you for giving me all of your thoughts. You've given me a few things to think about, and that's what I was looking for. So I appreciate it.
Great. Okay, and for any viewers, thanks for watching and thanks for participating in the chats. If you haven't liked or subscribed, I'd appreciate if you consider doing that. Oh, we got one more comment from Kudababa says, thanks, guys. Have a great night or day. Same to you. Appreciate it. All right. And I'm going to now sign off on YouTube. And then shortly after that, I will sign off on Zoom. Okay, I just hit end on YouTube. And now I'm coming back to Zoom. And